There comes a moment when the noise becomes unbearable, not because it's loud, but because it's everywhere. It seeps into your thoughts, your habits, your progress. It hides behind compliments, behind distractions, behind people who smile in your face but secretly hope you never rise. And if you're quiet long enough, you begin to hear it for what it is, fear. Not yours, theirs. They fear what you might become if you stop explaining. They fear what you'll build if you stop waiting for applause. They fear the version of you that no longer asks for permission to grow. And that's where the shift begins. Not with fire, not with fanfare, but with silence. Because silence is not the absence of noise, it is the presence of power. It's where warriors sharpen their focus, where leaders form in solitude, where legacy is born. Not in the spotlight, but in the shadows. You felt it, haven't you? That weight pressing on your back, not from what you carry, but from who watches, who waits, who doubts. The unspoken tension in the room when your ambition walks in. The subtle discomfort your clarity causes in others. And you wonder why. It's because you're not like them. You don't beg to be seen. You don't need validation to move. You don't talk to prove, you move to prove. And that unnerves them because they thrive on attention, on reactions, on knowing they've gotten into your head. But when you give them silence instead of response, calm instead of chaos, purpose instead of panic, you rob them of their game. You take away their weapon. And suddenly, their control dissolves. Not with a scream, but with stillness. You see, they never feared your voice, they feared your silence. Because silence can't be manipulated. It can't be predicted. It can't be used against you. So they'll try to pull you back, not because you're wrong, but because you're outgrowing their limitations. Your consistency exposes their excuses. Your rise threatens their comfort, and they'll do it quietly, through gossip, through doubt, through distraction. Not loud attacks, just enough resistance to make you question yourself. That's how the world slows most people down. But not you, because you've chosen a different path, one that doesn't chase comfort, one that doesn't explain every decision, one that moves without noise, without permission, without looking back. In that path, that's where your real power lives. In the early mornings no one sees. In the late nights, no one applauds. In the decisions you make when no one is watching, that's where you're building something they'll never understand because they're too busy watching, talking, doubting. But you're too busy doing. You've learned that peace is power, that detachment is a shield, that when your focus becomes sacred, your silence becomes deadly. Because while they're busy chasing attention, you're mastering discipline. While they're comparing, competing, performing, you're creating. Slowly, deliberately, without noise. And that makes you dangerous. You're not moved by emotions anymore. You're not triggered by opinions. You don't flinch when they throw shade, because you know shadows only follow light. And the brighter you shine, the louder they'll whisper. Let them. Because when you stop explaining, you start evolving. And that's when the shift becomes permanent. You stop arguing, you stop defending, you stop leading in front of people who celebrated your wounds, and you start moving with intention, with clarity, with a rhythm so consistent it becomes untouchable. They'll call it arrogance. They'll call it coldness. But that's just their insecurity reacting to your restraint. Because when you withhold access, when you protect your energy, when you walk away without a sound, they feel it. That silence hits harder than any argument ever could. You don't owe anyone your noise. You owe yourself your destiny. And that destiny cannot be built while you're stuck in cycles of reaction, approval, and over-explanation. It can only be built in silence, in separation, in self-respect so high, it refuses to beg to be seen. This is how storms are made. Not the chaotic kind that destroys, but the kind that moves through quietly, changing everything in its path and leaving behind no doubt that it passed through. You don't need to announce your arrival. Let your results do that. Let your progress whisper in rooms where your name was once doubted. Let your absence speak volumes in places where you were once overlooked. Let your elevation say what your words never needed to. Because this isn't about revenge. This is about rebirth. You've chosen to build in silence, and that makes you unstoppable. Let them wonder where you went. Let them guess what you're planning. Let them sit in the uncertainty of not knowing, because mystery breeds fear, and silence builds mystery. And that is how you rise without resistance, not by seeking power, but by becoming it. They tried to measure you by noise, but you don't move in decibels, you move in decisions. You shift the ground beneath you without a single word, and that silence, it speaks in ways they'll never understand. Because you've realized the most powerful transformations don't make a sound. They don't post updates. They don't explain timelines. They don't need to be watched to be real, they just happen. And when they do, they leave people stunned, wondering how you became something they never saw coming. But you saw it. You felt it in the late nights you stayed in while everyone else was celebrating mediocrity. You felt it in the mornings when you woke up tired but still chose discipline. You felt it every time you wanted to explain yourself and didn't. And now, you feel it in the control, the calm, the precision, the unshakable way your presence enters a room before your voice ever does. They don't know how to handle that. Because most people are wired for reaction, not resilience. They feed on chaos. They depend on emotional outbursts to make sense of the world. But you're no longer available for those games. You've upgraded your standards. And with that upgrade comes isolation. Because the higher you rise, the quieter it gets. Not because no one's watching, but because they no longer know how to approach you. The old tactics don't work. The old roles don't fit. The old conversations feel like sand in your mouth, dry, repetitive, meaningless. You outgrew them in silence. And now your absence is louder than your presence ever was. That's what scares them. Because they used to know how to push your buttons. They knew how to bait you into conversations, arguments, defenses. But now, all they get is the stillness. And that stillness, it's a mirror. It forces them to see themselves without your reaction to hide behind. When you stop explaining, they start unraveling. And that's the difference between power and performance. Performance needs an audience. Power doesn't. You're not here for performance anymore. You're not here to prove. You're not here to please. You're here to finish, to build, to become. That doesn't happen in the noise. That doesn't happen in approval. That happens in silence, in the space where growth feels more like discomfort than applause. And it's not because you don't feel things. It's because you've mastered the art of choosing where your energy goes. You've learned that not every insult deserves your breath. Not every invitation deserves your RSVP. Not every attack deserves your reaction. They want you emotional, reactive, predictable, because that makes you manageable. But when you stay calm, when you stay grounded, when you stay focused, they lose their grip. They can't compete with consistency. They can't match discipline. They don't know what to do with someone who just won't stop. That's what makes you dangerous. Not your rage, not your roar, but your refusal to be shaken. Let them call it silence. You know it's strategy. Because while they waste time decoding your moves, you're already 5 steps ahead. While they gossip in circles, you're building in straight lines. While they hope you fall, you've already designed the floor they'll trip on. They underestimated you, not because you were weak, but because you were quiet. They mistook your composure for compliance, your patience for passivity, your silence for surrender. But you were never surrendering, you were preparing. You were building strength in private. You were stacking wins they couldn't see. You were becoming immune to their distractions, their tactics, their drama. Yeah. You don't flinch when they come at you sideways. You don't engage with low-level energy. You don't explain your evolution to people committed to misunderstanding. You just keep moving, like water, like wind, like something they can feel but never touch. You are the storm they didn't see coming. And the beauty of it? You never needed to announce a thing. Let them talk. Let them fill the silence with stories. Let them guess what your next move is. That uncertainty is your weapon. Because when people don't know your schedule, they can't disrupt it. When they don't know your goals, they can't sabotage them. When they don't know your thoughts, they can't twist them. You've learned how to be your own sanctuary, your own source, your own security. You don't look outward for confirmation. You don't wait for permission. You don't chase support to stay strong. You are your own momentum now. And that scares them more than anything. Because once you stop needing the noise, you become untouchable. They don't fear the loud ones. The loud ones give away their position. They speak before they think. They react before they plan. They show their cards in every conversation just to feel significant. But you say nothing. And yet you say everything. Because your silence is not absence, it's pressure. It builds slowly, and when it lands, it leaves an impact no words ever could. You've stopped handing out previews. You've stopped explaining your blueprint to people who never intended to help build it. You realized not everyone deserves access. Not to your mind, not to your plans, not to your peace. Isn't that boundary? It's not arrogance. It's awareness. Because the moment you started choosing clarity over company, your world shifted. You stopped entertaining every call, every distraction, every person who only checked in to measure your progress against their comfort. You saw the truth. Many don't want you better, they want you familiar. And the second you outgrow the role they assigned to you, their support turns into resistance. Not always obvious. Often it's subtle. Withdrawn energy, delayed responses, the silence of those who once cheered, now watching in discomfort. But you don't need them to clap. You're not here for applause. You're here to become undeniable. And that requires silence. It requires discipline. It requires disappearing long enough to reappear unrecognizable. Not because you changed to prove a point, but because you evolved to meet your purpose. You no longer announce your healing, you just stop bleeding in public. You no longer narrate your grind, you just let the results echo in the spaces that once doubted you. Because when you build in silence, the only thing loud is your consistency. And consistency is where most people break. They start strong, loud, motivated. But motivation is cheap. It burns fast and fades faster. What separates the average from the unstoppable is the quiet work, the unsexy work, the daily, boring, disciplined work that gets done when no one is watching and no one cares. But you care because you know the truth. Talent without discipline is wasted. Ideas without execution are fantasies, and noise without results is just performance. You've chosen the harder path, the quieter one, the one that doesn't feed your ego, but feeds your future. That's why you've stopped explaining. Explaining is a luxury for those who have time to defend themselves. You don't. You've replaced reaction with reflection. You've replaced arguments with action. You've replaced performance with process. Now, you're just focused, not loud, not defensive, not distracted. Focused. And when a focused mind commits to growth, there is no force more dangerous. Because focused energy is surgical, it's deliberate. It doesn't flinch, doesn't beg, doesn't bend to noise. They try to provoke you, you keep building. They try to confuse you, you keep moving. They throw shade, you plant roots. You've become too rooted to be shaken, too disciplined to be delayed, too evolved to be provoked. Let them wonder what happened to you. Let them whisper that you've changed. They're right. You're no longer available for emotional manipulation, no longer available for conversations that waste your potential, no longer accessible to people who only show up to take, question, compare. Your silence is not an empty space. It is sacred. It is filled with intention, with structure, with vision, and you've learned how to guard it like gold. Because not everyone wants to see you win. Some just want to be close enough to watch your progress fail. That's why you went quiet. That's why you stepped back, not to isolate, but to insulate. You are building something that can't be touched, something that doesn't shake when the world gets loud, something that will stand long after the doubters move on to their next target. And it starts with your habits, the ones no one sees, the ones you do when you're tired, uninspired, and tempted to quit. The tiny, thankless efforts that compound in the background while the rest of the world chases attention. That's your edge. Because while they try to be seen, you're trying to be strong. While they perform, you prepare. While they search for applause, you search for alignment. And alignment doesn't need approval, it needs integrity. It needs inner order. It needs you to stay so rooted in your mission that even your silence carries authority. This is not about pretending to be above others. It's about rising beyond what used to hold you down. You've seen how quickly distractions multiply when you start to gain traction. The moment your light grows, so do the shadows. But you've stopped chasing light in others. You became it. And now you radiate differently. Quietly, sharply, unshakably. Because you don't need to convince people you're evolving, you need to keep evolving. And that's what you've been doing, not for show. For survival, for alignment, for freedom. You walk different now. You move with a stillness that makes people uneasy, not because you're cold, but because you're in control. They expect noise, you give them calm. They expect drama, you give them distance. They expect explanation, you give them silence. And that's what they can't process. That someone like you, someone they once had access to, once understood, once underestimated, has become unreadable, untouchable, unstoppable. You've stepped out of their reach, and you did it without a single announcement. You don't flinch when they try to bait you anymore. That part of you, the one that needed to explain, needed to defend, needed to be understood, is gone. And in its place is something far more powerful, peace. Not the kind you beg for, but the kind you build. The kind you protect with silence, with restraint, with mastery. Because when your emotions stop being public property, your power multiplies. You've stopped handing out emotional access like invitations to a party no one deserved to attend. You've learned that not everything deserves your reaction. Not every fire needs your oxygen. Some things die if you just stop feeding them. They thought they had control because they could make you react, but now you've become immune. Their insults echo into silence. Their provocations hit a wall of calm, and in that stillness, they hear something terrifying, the absence of control. Your silence becomes their chaos. That's why stillness is strength. Stillness is knowing you could destroy them with truth, but choosing to build yourself instead. Stillness is walking through storms without explaining your umbrella. Stillness is realizing that when you don't respond, you starve their ego and feed your purpose. You've stopped rushing to prove you're okay. You are okay, and even if you weren't, you no longer believe that your healing has to look like performance. You can bleed in private. You can rebuild in quiet. You can become in peace. Because real confidence doesn't need to speak. It doesn't posture. It doesn't announce itself like a parade. It enters quietly and is felt instantly. Real confidence is the way you carry yourself when everything around you is uncertain, but you still remain unmoved. And that's what breaks people. They can't comprehend how you don't need attention to feel worthy, how you can sit at a table without saying a word, yet your presence fills the room, how you can take hits without flinching, walk away without looking back, and win without saying, "I told you so." That's why they underestimate you, because they expect strength to look loud. But your power lives in your precision. You don't speak to impress, you speak to impact. And when impact isn't required, you remain silent. Because silence is a filter. It removes what's unnecessary. It separates what's real from what's noise. And the moment you started filtering, your focus became lethal. You noticed how much time you were wasting, trying to be heard by people committed to misunderstanding you, so you stopped. You noticed how much energy you were spending justifying your healing to people still broken themselves, so you pulled back. You noticed how much of your identity was built on proving your worth instead of owning it, so you let that version of you go. Well, you walk lighter, not because you have less responsibility, but because you've released the weight of needing to be accepted. You no longer fight for a seat at tables that never respected your voice. You build your own table in silence and let your presence speak when it's time. You've mastered what most people run from, the discipline of detachment. Not the cold kind, not the numb kind, the focused kind, the kind of detachment that keeps you anchored when life tries to pull you into chaos. The kind that lets you choose your battles wisely and keeps you out of wars that only drain you. This isn't indifference, this is control. And control isn't about being perfect. It's about knowing who you are and what you're not willing to compromise anymore. You no longer chase closure, you create clarity. You no longer engage in circles that go nowhere. You move in straight lines. You no longer explain your path to people walking in different directions. You just walk. Because your mission requires your full attention now. Not the scattered kind, not the distracted kind. The focused, intentional kind that shows up even when no one's cheering. That kind that grinds in the dark so it can shine with substance, not spectacle. They don't understand how someone like you could go so quiet, but they don't need to. Let them think you've fallen off. Let them assume you gave up. Let them talk. That's the beauty of silence. It gives them enough rope to tie themselves in knots trying to figure you out. Meanwhile, you're sharpening, growing, healing, planning. You're becoming so consistent that nothing they say can shift your direction. And the more they watch, the more confused they become. Because you're not reacting like you used to. You're not entertaining their chaos. You're not seeking their approval. You're just moving, quietly, efficiently, relentlessly. That's what they fear. Not the noise you make, but the silence you move in. Because it means they can no longer read you. They can't predict you. And if they can't predict you, they can't stop you. This is what power looks like. It's not flashy, it's not loud, it's not posted for the world to praise. It's consistent, it's disciplined, it's quiet. And that's why it lasts. You don't announce your next move anymore, you just move. You don't ask for permission, you don't explain the shift, you don't seek understanding. You shift and let the world catch up, if it ever does. Because silence isn't just protection, it's preparation. Every time you chose solitude over noise, structure over chaos, discipline over distraction, you were building something no one could interfere with. You were constructing the version of yourself they wouldn't recognize, because it no longer needed their approval to exist. You see, when you move in silence, the noise can't reach you. It might knock at your door, it might scream from the sidelines, but it never gets in. Because silence closes the door on doubt. It tightens your focus. It tells your soul, we're not available for nonsense anymore. That's when you rise differently. Not with a bang, but with a presence. A grounded, untouchable presence that disrupts everything simply by walking into a room, not because you're trying to dominate, but because you're done shrinking. You're done explaining to people who never listened. You're done bleeding in front of people who laughed at your wounds. You're done inviting people to a version of your life they only show up to mock, not to support. So you withdrew, not in weakness, but in wisdom, because you realized peace is expensive, and not everyone can afford the price of your silence. Now you don't flinch when someone questions your distance. You don't get defensive when they say you've changed. You nod, because you have. You've changed how you react. You've changed how you give. You've changed who you let close. Your time is no longer a gift for the ungrateful. Your attention is no longer a stage for their drama. Your vision is no longer open for debate. This is what strategic isolation looks like. Not loneliness, not rejection, precision, control, ownership. You've stopped needing company to validate your mission. You've stopped waiting for someone to walk with you, because most people only want to be beside you when the road is smooth. But this path, it's steep, it's rugged, it requires someone who's all in. Someone who doesn't ask, is it worth it? Because they already decided it is. And that someone is you. You didn't become this by accident. You became this because you got tired of distractions dressing up as love. You got tired of being drained by conversations that led nowhere. You got tired of explaining your light to people addicted to darkness. So now you don't explain, you expand. You don't ask, you act. You don't chase, you create. When they finally notice the difference, it'll be too late to keep up. Because the silence you built in was the same silence that made you unstoppable. They thought you were just quiet. But silence isn't just the absence of sound. It's the presence of structure, of direction, of discipline. It's where warriors are built. It's where you sharpen the parts of yourself that no one applauded. And now, you don't need the spotlight because you shine in your own lane. Not because you want to be seen, but because your growth made it impossible not to be. Well, some will try. They'll throw old versions of you in your face. They'll test your reaction. They'll tempt your patience. They'll try to make you loud again because your silence makes them uncomfortable. It reminds them of what they haven't done, of who they haven't become. Let them be uncomfortable. Let them talk about the you they used to know. That's not your concern. That's not your weight to carry. You don't need to correct their narrative. You don't need to defend your evolution. You just need to keep walking. Because while they're obsessing over your silence, you're building a reality they'll never get to touch. And by the time they realize what's happening, you'll be too far ahead to reach. That's the consequence of ignoring someone who is building in silence. When they rise, you don't get an invitation to the top. This is how legacies are born. Not in crowds, not in applause, not in viral moments, but in silence. In the early mornings, in the disciplined nights, in the sacrifices no one claps for, in the decisions you made when everything in you wanted to quit, but didn't. You've become the kind of force that doesn't make noise, because it doesn't need to. You've become the kind of presence that shakes people, not because you shout, but because you don't. They feel it, they see it, they sense it, and they know. You've become someone they can't distract, can't delay, can't decode. And that is the most dangerous thing you could ever become. There's a reason they keep poking at you. It's not because they're stronger. It's because they've noticed they can no longer read you. You've become still, focused, unreachable. And that silence, it scares them. Because you've stopped playing the game. You no longer hand out pieces of your peace to buy temporary understanding. You don't engage with every opinion. You don't defend every step. You don't shrink just to keep the room comfortable. That silence they hate, it's your freedom, and they know it. Because when you stopped reacting, they lost their grip. They used to be able to shift your mood with a single comment, get in your head with a question, steal your energy with a stare. Now, you're composed, grounded, immovable. And the moment you became unshakable, they started falling apart. You weren't loud about it, you didn't post about it, you didn't throw it in their face. You just decided, no more. No more bleeding for people who wouldn't bandage you. No more performing strength for people who hoped you'd fail. No more wasting breath on people committed to misunderstanding. Because you've learned that silence doesn't mean weakness, it means mastery. You don't rise by arguing, you rise by outlasting. And when you combine consistency with quiet, you become unstoppable. Not because you're lucky, but because you're disciplined. You know now that power isn't shown in noise. Power is what remains when everything else is taken away. It's the structure that still stands after the crowd leaves. It's the routine that still holds when motivation fades. It's the progress you make when no one's clapping. That's where your confidence comes from, not from applause, from alignment, from knowing you didn't quit when it got hard, from showing up even when it was inconvenient, from building something in the dark and realizing you never needed the spotlight, you needed the work. And while the world was chasing hype, you were becoming real. They don't see the nights you wanted to give up, the moments you questioned everything, the weight you carried alone, but they feel the result of that struggle every time you walk in the room with a calm they can't shake. That's not luck. That's self-control. And they can't copy it because it's not learned in noise. It's forged in silence. You've walked through the fire and stopped explaining the burn. You've healed wounds without needing to showcase the scars. You've grown roots so deep that no wind can pull you out now. And when they try, you don't budge, you don't flinch, you don't fold. Because you've mastered what breaks most people, emotional discipline. You feel everything but react to nothing. You notice everything but engage with little. You carry power in your restraint, not because you don't care, but because you've chosen peace over participation. That's what maturity looks like. Not silence because you're scared, silence because you've already chosen where your energy goes. And noise isn't on the list. You've stopped chasing closure, you've stopped demanding clarity, you've stopped needing people to agree with your path before you walk it. Done performing for people who treat your purpose like entertainment. Done opening up to those who only listen to respond, not understand. Done arguing with people who fear your potential more than they ever supported it. Now you just move, you build, you protect, and you disappear when the environment no longer matches your energy. Because real growth doesn't cling, it releases. It doesn't beg, it selects. It doesn't prove, it proceeds. And every time you walk away in silence, instead of staying to be heard, you level up. Not because walking away is easy, but because staying would cost you your peace. And your peace is now your highest currency. You don't trade it for approval anymore. You don't let people rent space in your head with opinions that never built anything. You've come too far to be pulled back by pettiness. So let them call it distance. Let them call it coldness. Let them misunderstand the silence. You owe them nothing. Not your explanation, not your emotions, not your energy. Because the version of you that once needed to be seen, she's gone. And what replaced her? A presence that needs no introduction. A power that moves in silence. A force that cannot be provoked. You've become untouchable, not by accident, but by decision. And the final stage of growth isn't being praised by those who doubted you. It's no longer needing their praise at all. You don't walk like you used to. You move with intention now. There's no hurry, no panic, no need to impress. Your steps are measured, quiet. But every one of them carries the weight of everything you've survived. That's what silence does. It doesn't just hide your plans, it hardens your spine, it sharpens your edge, it strips away everything that once made you doubt yourself, until all that's left is clarity, crystal, cutting, unshakable. They'll call it mystery, you'll call it evolution. Because somewhere between being misunderstood and being underestimated, you stopped trying to be understood. You stopped offering explanations to those who never cared to listen. You stopped making yourself small just to be accepted by people whose vision couldn't hold your greatness. You stopped. And that's when everything started. Your silence became your reset. Your calm became your construction zone. And while they talked, you worked. While they watched, you transformed. While they doubted, you built something they couldn't stop, even if they tried. That's what they never saw coming. Not a louder you, not a more aggressive you, a quieter you, a more focused you, a version of you so deeply rooted in purpose that the wind doesn't move you, it sharpens you. And now they don't know how to approach you. They fumble around your stillness, confused by your calm, unsettled by the fact that you're no longer available for chaos. Because the moment you stopped being reactive, you became dangerous. There's nothing more threatening to a world addicted to noise than someone who doesn't need it. You don't chase attention, you attract energy. You don't demand respect, you command space. You don't yell to be heard. You become so undeniable they have no choice but to listen. And the best part? You didn't do it for them. You did it for the version of you who sat in the dark trying to figure out why nothing felt right. You did it for the version of you who kept showing up when no one noticed. You did it for the version of you who kept choosing growth, even when it was lonely, painful, or invisible. You kept walking. And now they look up and they don't even recognize you. They weren't supposed to. You weren't meant to be the same, you were meant to rise. And rise you did. Not with noise, but with execution. With focus, with discipline so ruthless it became sacred. Now your presence speaks where your words never had to. Your peace radiates louder than your past. Your eyes no longer scan for approval. They look straight ahead, locked into a future they can't define, can't delay, can't deny. Because while they were waiting for you to fail, you were becoming unfuckwithable. You don't beg to be chosen anymore. You choose yourself. You don't wait to be validated. You validate your own path with results. You don't explain your boundaries, you embody them. That's what true control looks like. Not yelling, not posting, not performing, but showing up every single day with no audience, no hype, no noise, and still becoming stronger, sharper, more aligned. Because discipline doesn't crave praise. It craves purpose. And you've found yours. It lives in your silence. It echoes in your restraint. It pulses through every breath you take without reacting, every moment you grow without sharing, every second you build without applause. That's what real strength is made of. Not reaction, but resilience. Not emotion, but execution. Not volume, but vision. So let them keep talking. Let them assume you're stuck, silent, distant. Let them think you've disappeared. You haven't disappeared. You've evolved. And now, you don't need to announce your transformation. Your life will do it for you. Every boundary you hold, every step you take, every result you produce in full silence will scream what you no longer say out loud. You've arrived, not to be liked. Every step you take, every result you produce in full silence will scream what you no longer say out loud. You've arrived, not to be liked, not to be understood, not to prove anything, but to dominate your own lane in your own way with a kind of power they can't predict and a silence they'll never decode. And when they finally feel the full force of who you've become, it'll be too late to catch up. because the shift is done. The noise is gone, and what's left is you, built in silence, driven by purpose, unshakable, and absolutely unstoppable. Let the silence speak. Let the results roar. And never ever explain your rise.